So, these are problems, or one of the problems, in Dawkins' view of God and evolution. I'll just say this on the positive side. If you want to talk about it, we can. I think the questions that the theologians haven't addressed, and Christians who are scientists haven't addressed, is this. If the God we believe in has created the universe and sustains it in existence, why would God use something like evolution by natural selection to bring life into existence? Now, this is a version of that second conversation. Can we elaborate our understanding of God so that it's rich enough to answer this question? And the place I go for the answer is to St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. So let's say I stop there, and you may have some questions or comments or whatever around this theme about can you be a Christian, can science and religion be friends, or must they be foes?
Well, if I could kick off with one question, Stephen. As I mentioned, some of my students ask me, you believe in evolution or the Bible. How would you answer that question? You mentioned as well about Richard Dawkins saying that some Christians, he thinks that they cherry pick the things that they like from the Bible and they ignore everything else that sits uncomfortably. How would you respond to that?
I'll go back to Galileo, because Galileo had an answer to these questions, which finally became the centre plate of the Church's teaching in the late 19th century. Here's his answer. He was put this question, almost verbatim, by the Grand Duchess Christina, who wanted to know how we reconcile these things. It wasn't evolution, but it was the Copernican view of the Bible, but his answer will do wonders for us here. I hope it does. Here's Galileo's answer. I think it's extremely simple, but it's part of what one needs to have as a Christian. He said, he appealed to an old teaching that God is the author of two books, the book of nature and the book of scripture. Because God is the author of two books, because there is only one author, the two books, when they are correctly being interpreted, cannot be in contradiction. Now, so if you think your science is right, in this case he thought his Copernican view was right, then you have to go back and ask, how then should we be interpreting Scripture? Now, what a lot of people do without knowing anything about Galileo, they do the following, which I think is a mistake. They say, oh, the 6 days, if it's this one, the 6 days must be 6 long eras. And so what they do is to stretch the Bible, they stretch the text over the latest bit of scientific finding. The 6 days must be large, vast, galactic, universe, time, whatever. Wrong. Wrong. So why is that wrong? Well, you could find a text in the Bible that says one day with the Lord is like 1,000 years. You might find scholars that actually argue that the grammatical forms are tenseless. What you can't do is to say that what it means is vast eons. Furthermore, when you do that, when you stretch the text over the latest bit of scientific finding, what you're doing is evacuating the text of its own true senses, and you're giving all of the authority to the scientific view. I consider that to be a weak move, right? Because it focuses attention as if what the Bible had to teach was, well, who knows what it has to teach, because we're now stretching the text over the latest scientific finding. So what are we left with besides maybe God created everything? It evacuates the Bible of its substantial teaching. Now, without getting into a rave, at least one person in the room knows me well enough to wave, if I go into a ray. But the test of this, right, Galileo's view is that God is the author of 2 books. So when they're correctly interpreted, they will not be in conflict. If you find the conflict, then one or other of the 2 books is being misinterpreted. All right? So the test of this case would be, well, can we get any substantial religious teaching from the Bible about creation? Does it have a message of its own? And part of the message of that is, now, I started to draw. I don't spend my life as a biblical scholar. I'm drawing on bits and pieces together from biblical scholarship. But it goes like this, that the Genesis thing, first of all, is not the only creation story in the Bible. John chapter 1 is one. But in the Genesis one, the Genesis is one of the last books of the Old Testament written, coming out of the exile of the Jews in Babylon, where the sun, the moon, and the stars are worshipped. Right. This is a polemical, theological text to help Jews in exile or coming out of exile to live faithfully as Jews and not to be seduced by the extraordinary, powerful, political, religious context of Babylon. The text itself is more like a literary, more poetic and liturgical in its structure. And it has a view of human beings that is unparalleled. In the comparable religious texts of the era, of the same period, human beings are the playthings of the gods. In Genesis, human beings carry the dignity of, as humankind, are the image of God. This is extraordinary. In the other text, creation comes about by a violent act of the gods. In this text, God simply speaks. This is a remarkably peaceful, pacific, non-violent creation. This is an utterly different vision of God and the universe and of human beings, right? Which, if you just stretch the text over the latest bit of scientific finding, you divert your eyes away from this. Now, to go to the evolutionary part of that, you need to go back to my question, why would God use evolution? So that having now these rich theological themes, are they going to be proved rich enough to go on to answer this question? And my answer to that is yes. And it's a longer story, and we'll see if this is quite the time for it. But the point I want to make is that for many of these issues, please remember Galileo's principle, 2 books principle. God is the author of 2 books because there is one author. Ultimately, when properly interpreted, they will not be in contradiction.
We probably have time for one more question if anyone's got one. But if, yep, around the corner there. Do you want to speak up?
Sure. You keep alluding to why God would use the evolution as a mechanism, given that it's so violent. That's what I'd like to know the answer to.
Okay. So in the discussion with Neil in public in lectures, this is the natural evil problem, right? Now here's the thing. I feel like we've all gone forward a bit. I should have cracked a few jokes here. I'll tell you what, by the way, just into it, is that Neil loves this because he was in a kind of taxi when he got out of Melbourne, and the guy said in the taxi, "What are you doing?" I lecturing in philosophy of science, and the guy said, Isn't that stuff about Galileo who got burned at the stake? No, Galileo never got burned at the stake, but that's one of many myths, including the flat earth myth and many others that Neil hates because atheists tend to promote them. Now back to the main game. Here's the way this argument works. You can say that evolution is a problem, is a natural evil. And if you say that, what you mean is that the way the world has evolved, the way the world is quite different from what you would expect an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God to create. Right? That's the argument.